It didn't fall apart when they left you. It fell apart when God stepped in. They thought walking away from you was their victory, but in heaven's eyes, it was their exposure. They believed they were discarding you. But what they didn't realize is that they were being removed from someone God was about to elevate. See, when someone plays with a pure heart, manipulates a faithful soul, and abuses the trust of someone God hand-picked, the separation that follows isn't emotional. It's divine intervention. The moment God pulled you out of that toxic bond, the unraveling began, and now it's visible for all to see. Their health is failing, their peace is gone, their world is caving in, and nothing they try is working anymore. You didn't curse them. You didn't retaliate. You simply obeyed. And God did what he always does for his beloved. He defended you. So now the narcissist is getting worse and worse, not because you left, but because heaven finally said, that's enough. God's separated you, and it wasn't just for your protection. There comes a moment in every believer's life when the silence of God becomes the loudest answer they'll ever receive. You don't hear a thunderclap, you don't see the skies part, and you don't get a voice from heaven explaining why the people you loved suddenly turned cold, why the one you poured into began draining you, or why the person who once swore to protect you became the very source of your pain. But one day, without warning, something shifts. The phone calls slow down, the affection disappears, the atmosphere becomes suffocating. You pray, you plead, you cry yourself to sleep, asking God to fix it, to restore it, to bring it back to the way it was in the beginning. But nothing changes. And then it happens. The relationship breaks, the connection severs, and all you're left with is the ache. You think you failed. You think you weren't strong enough. You think you misheard God or missed some hidden sign. Because surely the kind of pain you're feeling must mean something went wrong. But what if it didn't? What if the separation wasn't a mistake, but a merciful intervention? What if the tearing wasn't punishment, but divine preservation? Because here's what few understand in the beginning of separation. When God pulls you away from someone, it's never just about the relief of your suffering. It's about the protection of your purpose. God doesn't just react to what hurts you. He moves to defend what he's placed inside you. And he knows when that purpose is in danger, even before you do. You may have loved them with everything you had. You may have believed in them, prayed for them, fought for them. But God sees what you can't, what they think in secret, what they plan behind your back, what dwells in the deep places of their heart. And sometimes what you think is just emotional chaos is actually a spiritual war. You don't just feel uneasy because of arguments. You feel spiritually disturbed because God is showing you the undercurrent of something much darker. Manipulation, deception, spiritual resistance, pride, control. Things not easily seen on the surface, but deadly beneath. And when the time comes, God will not hesitate to step in. When you belong to him, he doesn't ask for permission to protect you. He moves. And when he does, the break often feels brutal, sudden, confusing, even cruel. But that's because your soul is still catching up to what your spirit already knows. You were never safe in that connection. You were bound, not blessed. You were surviving, not thriving. You were tolerating torment and calling it loyalty. But God calls it spiritual captivity. And he will not allow his sons and daughters to remain enslaved to something that kills their identity, silences their voice, and drains their anointing. So he separates, not just physically. He separates you emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And at first, it hurts, because you miss what you once knew, even if it was dysfunctional. You long for the moments of peace, even if they were surrounded by cycles of chaos. That's human. That's expected. God doesn't fault you for grieving what He Himself had to tear away. But eventually, you begin to see the clarity. The fog lifts, the knots in your stomach loosen, the internal tension that became your norm starts to fade, and you realize something. Peace was never supposed to be that rare. Your soul was never designed to beg for rest. Your love was never meant to be weaponized against you. And slowly you recognize what God took away wasn't a loss. It was a lifeline, because if you had stayed, you would have shrunk. You would have compromised your calling. You would have spent the rest of your life walking on eggshells, playing small so someone else could feel big, apologizing for your emotions while excusing their behavior, defending yourself from lies while protecting their image. That is not partnership. That is bondage. And God doesn't call His children into slavery. He calls them into covenant. So when He pulled you out, He wasn't just ending a relationship. He was shutting down an assignment from hell, sent to derail your destiny. Let that sink in. Your obedience in letting go became the turning point in your entire spiritual timeline. The very act of surrender you thought would destroy you was actually the act of war that dismantled everything the enemy tried to build around your life. You said yes to God, and all of hell had to let go. And here's what's most sobering. When God removes you from someone, He removes His covering from them too. Not because He doesn't love them, but because He holds them accountable. When someone abuses the presence of the one God sent, they invite judgment, not just consequences. Because what they touched wasn't just a person, it was His temple. What they lied on wasn't just your reputation, it was His witness. What they disrespected wasn't just you, it was the very grace of God that was operating through your life. That's why everything is crumbling for them now. Because when God separates, He also exposes. He lifts the grace that was shielding them while you were still present. He removes the spiritual protection they didn't even realize came through your prayers, your love, your intercession. And now they're standing uncovered, exposed to the full weight of the seeds they've sown. And it's only just begun. Their sickness, their confusion, their anxiety, their financial instability, their relational collapse. It isn't random. It's what happens when divine covering is removed. It's what happens when God says, "That's enough." So no, the separation wasn't just about your safety. It was about your sanctification. It was about their accountability. It was about heaven drawing a line in the sand and declaring, "This one is mine, and you can't touch them anymore." And the moment that line was drawn, their downfall began. Their world is unraveling, and they know exactly why. You may not see it with your natural eyes, but behind the scenes, behind the curated posts, the forced smiles, the hollow victories they parade for attention, everything is falling apart. Their world is unraveling, not in chaos all at once, but in the slow, suffocating collapse that can only come from the hand of a righteous God executing silent justice. The unraveling didn't begin with a financial crisis, a job loss, or a diagnosis. It began with the departure of favor, the moment God's grace lifted from the places they used to feel untouchable. At first, they brushed it off. A missed opportunity here, a strained relationship there, nothing too noticeable. But then came the patterns, the tension that wouldn't go away, the anxiety they couldn't explain, the pressure they couldn't release. The harder they tried to pretend everything was fine, the more they felt something tightening around their life, a spiritual constriction they can't name, but can feel in their bones. And deep down they know why. They remember the day you walked away. They remember the final look in your eyes, not of anger, but of resolve. They remember the stillness that followed your silence. And whether they admit it or not, They felt haunted ever since. Haunted by the peace that left with you. Haunted by the stability that started slipping. Haunted by the reality that they touched something sacred and treated it like it was disposable, because that's what you were. Sacred. You weren't just another person in their life. You were a covering, a gift, a spiritual lifeline in human form. You carried the presence of God into their atmosphere, and for a while, they benefited from it. Their life elevated when you showed up. Their mind was calmer when you prayed. Their path was clearer when you walked beside them. And instead of honoring it, they exploited it. Instead of protecting it, they abused it. And now, they're reaping the fruit of what they sowed in secret. They're not just losing jobs, they're losing favor. They're not just falling out with friends, they're falling out of divine alignment. They're not just battling stress, they're battling the withdrawal of the Holy Spirit's covering. Because the peace they used to feel when you were around, that wasn't from them. That was the residue of your presence. That was the overflow of your prayers. That was the echo of God's hand resting over your life and brushing against theirs. And now that God has repositioned you, now that He's drawn a boundary they cannot cross, they feel what life is like without divine protection. It's cold, it's dark, it's unstable, and it's only getting worse. And yet, rather than repent, rather than acknowledge the harm they caused or the lies they told, many of them double down. They grasp for control. They cling to image. They tell new lies to cover the old ones. But the unraveling continues, because you can't build on deception and expect stability. You can't sow division and expect unity. You can't mock God and avoid reaping. And that's what this is. Not karma, but reaping. This is Galatians 6:7. In motion, do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. You may feel tempted to reach out. You may still wrestle with the old you, the fixer, the peacemaker, the nurturer, wanting to make sure they're okay, even after everything. But listen closely. Don't interrupt the unraveling. Don't step back into what God has already judged. Don't confuse compassion with codependence. Don't let your healing heart be baited back into a battlefield that nearly cost you your soul. Let the unraveling continue. Let the justice of God speak. Let the silence do the talking. And if you ever feel weak, if your heart starts to ache for the person they pretended to be, remember the cost you paid to escape the lie. Remember who you were when you finally left, a shell, a whisper, a soul barely breathing. And then look at who you're becoming now, grounded, peaceful, restored. Let that be the proof that God made the right decision when He pulled you out. And if this resonates deep within you, if you feel the chills of truth as you read these words, comment below with the words, I felt it. Let the world know you recognize the shift. Let your story become a witness that God's justice is real and it does not fail. Because when God's justice begins to move, it doesn't just shake their world. It starts breaking them from the inside out. Bad health, bad luck, and no peace left in their life. There is a kind of pain that doesn't show up on the surface. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't bruise. It doesn't scream for help. It lingers quietly, spreading like rot beneath the floorboards of someone's life, eating away at the places they once called solid. That's the kind of pain the narcissist is now facing. It began with minor discomforts, headaches, tension in the shoulders, restlessness at night. But now, it's evolved into something deeper, more terrifying. The kind of wear and tear that no doctor can fully explain. The fatigue that won't go away. The pressure in the chest that feels like something is sitting on them. The insomnia that keeps them awake into the early morning hours, pacing, replaying every moment where they once had power, and now feel powerless. What they're battling isn't just physical, it's spiritual. Their body is reflecting what their soul is experiencing: unrest, torment, dis-ease. You see, when you live in deception long enough, your body starts to manifest what your conscience tries to bury. The lies they told, the manipulation they orchestrated, the blame they placed on you so they could appear clean, it's all coming back. Not in confrontation, not in public exposure, but in a private reckoning that's showing up in the most personal way: their health. There's no hiding from this. No amount of vitamins, routines, or retreats can undo the weight of unconfessed truth. No therapist can uncoil the kind of spiritual knot that forms when you refuse to take responsibility for the harm you caused. They may try to medicate the symptoms, but they can't silence the spiritual root, because the issue isn't just what's happening to their body. It's the source of it, the sin that's sitting unspoken in their soul. The anxiety won't let up, the depression grows, the dreams become disturbing, the mind races, the heart tightens, and underneath it all is one truth screaming for acknowledgement. They know this is happening because they never made things right. They know they should have confessed. They know they should have apologized, not to save their image, but to clear your name. But they didn't. Pride wouldn't let them. Ego told them to stay silent. And now, their silence is poisoning them from the inside out. What they feared most is now playing out in real time. Loss, deterioration, shame. And not just in the body. Everything they touch begins to break. The job starts to slip, the opportunities vanish, the support system they once relied on begins to retreat. One by one, the things that once made them feel secure are being stripped away, and all that's left is the naked truth. They are not well, not in the body, not in the mind, not in the soul. But the worst part for them isn't the symptoms, it's the silence from heaven. Because long ago, while they were still benefiting from your presence, they were protected by the grace that covered you. They didn't know it then, but your prayers, your forgiveness, your patience created a buffer between them and the consequences of their actions. But now that you're gone, not just from their life, but from their spiritual orbit, that covering has lifted, and without it, they are exposed to everything they once arrogantly believed they were immune to. What they called luck was favor. What they called resilience was mercy. What they thought was just who they are was actually the fruit of your intercession. And now it's all gone. What remains is a haunted shell of someone who used to believe they were untouchable, now unable to sleep, unable to breathe deeply, unable to stop the pain that keeps echoing louder each day. They may put on a smile for the world. They may still try to walk tall in public, but behind closed doors they are unraveling, slowly and painfully. The weight of unrepentant sin always finds its way back to the source, and this time there's no one left to carry it for them. They tried to keep their image, but God is exposing the truth. There is something deeply terrifying about a life built on illusion. Not because of how long the lie can last, but because of how suddenly it can collapse. The narcissist's greatest weapon was never their love. It was never their intelligence. It wasn't even their charm. It was their image, their reputation. The story they told the world to keep themselves in control and keep you in confusion. They crafted it carefully, a narrative where they were the victim, where they were misunderstood, where you were too emotional, too demanding, too much. They turned your boundaries into accusations, your tears into manipulation, your silence into guilt. And for a while it worked. People believed them. You even started to believe them. That's what made the pain so complex. You weren't just battling betrayal, you were fighting invisibility. You were hurting and unheard, bleeding while being blamed. But there's one thing the narcissist forgot. God doesn't play along with deception. You can manipulate people. You can spin stories. You can lie with your mouth and even convince yourself for a while, but you cannot fool the eyes that see in secret. God saw the phone calls they deleted, the conversations they twisted, the lies they told with a straight face. He saw every word spoken behind your back. He saw the smear campaigns, the triangulation, the gaslighting, all of it. And now he's responding. This is no longer about what you can prove. This is about what God is revealing. You don't need to argue anymore. You don't need to defend your name in rooms where your integrity was sold for gossip, because the same people who believed the lie are starting to see the truth. Not because you exposed it, but because God is turning the lights on in places they can't control. Their charm is wearing off. Their influence is fading. Their stories don't hold the weight they used to. And what once looked like strength is starting to look like performance. What once looked like confidence now smells like arrogance. And slowly, their carefully built tower of image is beginning to tilt. What's worse is that they feel it, the pressure, the panic, the knowing. They sense the exposure is near, and instead of repenting, they scramble. They double down. They try to control the fallout, spin a new story, shift the blame once more. But God is already 2 steps ahead, because this isn't about public embarrassment. It's about divine justice. And God isn't out to humiliate them. He's out to correct the record. Because they didn't just damage you, they damaged your witness. They didn't just lie about what happened, they lied about who you are. They made you carry shame that was never yours to hold. They watched you drown in confusion while they stood safely behind the curtain of false appearances. And God took that personal. You were never meant to live under the weight of someone else's projection. You were never meant to keep silent while they controlled the story. And now, what they refuse to confess is being shouted from the rooftops. Not by you, but by the consequences playing out in real time. Relationships they once used to boost their ego are distancing. Communities that once rallied behind them are watching more closely. And people who once doubted your story are starting to realize you were telling the truth all along. This is not coincidence. This is not karma. This is the justice of a holy God who is faithful to those who keep their hands clean and their hearts surrendered, even when they've been slandered, silenced, and scapegoated. They try to control the story, but they cannot control the outcome. They try to maintain the image, but they cannot reverse the exposure. Because when God lifts the veil, no performance is powerful enough to hide the truth. And in that exposure, slow, painful, irreversible, the same hand that once protected you is now clearing your name without you having to say a word. You took your power back, and now God is replacing what was lost. There is a kind of strength that doesn't come with fists raised or voices raised. It comes in the quiet decision to walk away, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in surrender. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, the moment you stopped defending your heart to someone who never truly honored it, the moment you finally whispered, God, I can't carry this anymore, that's when heaven moved. You may not have known it then, but when you let go of what was breaking you, you took your power back. Not the kind of power that controls others, but the kind of power that takes ownership of your soul, your mind, your future. You reclaimed what was sacred. You closed the door the enemy kept using to access your peace. And though you may have left that situation exhausted, trembling, and uncertain of what was next, you walked out with more authority than you ever had inside it. The world might have seen you as weak, too emotional, too dramatic, too soft, but heaven saw you as brave, because you didn't just walk away from a person, you walked away from a pattern, a cycle, a generational stronghold disguised as love. You broke ties with dysfunction that had a voice louder than your own, And in doing so, you aligned yourself with something far more powerful than control, the restoring hand of God. And now, slowly, sometimes without you even noticing, God is replacing what was lost, not in flashy overnight miracles, but in steady, faithful ways that prove He never left you. He's rebuilding the places you thought were permanently damaged. He's restoring the voice they tried to mute. He's rewiring your thoughts so that you no longer internalize someone else's sin as your shame. He's giving you back your confidence, not based on external affirmation, but rooted in the truth that you are loved, chosen, and deeply known by Him. The things that used to torment you don't shake you the same way anymore. The texts don't trigger panic. The memories no longer